Hi, this is Eric Keller for Otoy, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about how to create depth of field blurring effects using Octane cameras. And in this scene I have my dragonfly model perched on a twig here. This is one of the Quixel Megascan twigs that you can find in the Megascans library online. I also have a couple planes. These planes here represent grass. I guess I got 3 of them. And there's just a Octane shader with a texture map applied to them to give the look of just grass sticking out of the water, and then the water is just a simple plane with a specular material applied. So the first thing we need to do in this scene is create a camera. So I'll choose Create, Cameras, Camera, or you could click on the camera button on the Octane shelf. Doesn't matter either way. So I'm going to select this camera. Let's move it up in the scene, and let's go Panels, Perspective, Camera 1, so we can look through it. And I'm going to turn on the resolution gate. Kind of hidden there. There we go. Resolution gate. And let's pick just a quick view here. I want to make sure that I have something in the extreme foreground and something in the extreme background and the dragonfly in the middle. That way we can kind of check out how to work with depth of field. So now that I have my camera in the scene, I'm going to choose Windows, Render Settings, Render View. And there's an old render right there. But let's choose Render Snapshot Camera 1. And then hit the IPR button just to see what it looks like. And there we go. Now we have kind of our basic view here. So I'm just going to look through the camera and just kind of use the IPR to set up kind of a better angle so that we can clearly see the grass, dragonfly, the grass in the background. Maybe see if we can get just a slightly nicer composition. Now the grass this close up doesn't look very realistic, but it's going to be very blurred out. So that will definitely be improved as we go forward. So the next thing we need to do is take a look at our camera settings. So I can go up to the viewport menu here. If I click on this icon, it selects whatever camera you're currently looking through. So now I'll go to the camera shape tab, and let's go down to the Octane settings. We're using a thin lens camera, of course, which just means basically a regular camera. And we want to go to the thin lens camera settings and find aperture. So aperture is going to control the amount of blurring that we see in our render. So if I set this up to say 50, you're going to see that everything is blurred out except for the grass, which is very close to the camera. And if I set this to 0, then nothing is blurred out. So one thing I want to point out is that when I first start working in a scene and I set up a camera and I'm working with lighting and that kind of thing, I usually go into the thin lens camera settings and set aperture to 0 right away. Because if it's anything above 0, then you're going to get a little bit of blurring, and sometimes that can throw you off when you're trying to set up a shot. So make sure that this is set to 0 when you're starting out, but once you have the camera angle that you like, now we can start playing with the settings. So in order to find the ideal focus distance, in other words, what's going to be in focus in the image, I need to set the focal depth. But let's kind of crank up the aperture back to 50, just so it's like, that's way too high. Let's do 50. Just so it's like really obvious what's blurred out and what's in focus. And then if I go down to focal depth here, I'm going to turn off autofocus, because this is going to kind of throw us off. This is on by default. So turn this off. Otherwise you could be setting the focal depth all day long and not see any change, and that will drive you crazy. Turn off autofocus. Now you can see it's going to pick a new focus, or go to the default here, which is 10. And if I set this to, say, 50, you can see that now the grass in the background is blurred out, but also the dragonfly is. So I can sit here and try and guess which number is the best number to use. But there's probably a better way to do it that's a little bit more interactive and intuitive. And this is not necessarily an Octane thing, it's kind of an old Maya techniques, but it works just as well with Octane as it does with any other renderer. So I'm going to close this for now and switch to the perspective view, and let's choose Create, Measure Tools, Distance Tool. Once this tool is active, I'm going to click once in the scene and then again. Doesn't look like much happened, but I'll hit the Enter key. Let's press 4. And you can see what the measure tool does is it creates 2 locators and then this little measurement in between. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these locators, it doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to constrain it to our camera. So I'll select the camera, and then I'm going to hold the control button, select locator 1, go to the animation menu set, choose constrain, point. In the options, I just want to make sure that maintain offset is turned off, and then I'll hit apply, and you can see that that locator snaps to the position of the camera. And if I zoom in on the camera here, you can see if I move the camera around, that locator goes with it. So now we always have a point where we can measure from. Now let's take locator 2 here, and then we can stick this wherever we want the scene to be in focus. So usually for something like this, I will pick the eye as the center of focus. So I'll go to Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor, and on the left side I'm going to select the distance dimension, make sure in the outliner that shapes are visible, shape nodes are visible. I'll select the distance dimension shape node and choose reload left. So that's going to be the output, and the attribute that's going to be output is distance. So that is the number that we see here, this number right here. And then I'm going to take my camera, again, let's select the shape node of the camera and choose reload right. And what I want to do is I want to go down here and find the Octane attributes towards the bottom here. And the one that I want is focal depth, focal depth, OCT focal depth. I click on that, you can see the focal depth immediately turns bright yellow, meaning that it has an incoming connection. So I can close this. Let's go back to our IPR here and unpause it. Let's just do another render. And now you can see our dragonfly is in focus. Our foreground grass is out of focus, and same with the background grass. The one other thing that you want to look out for when working with depth of field, that's very important, is that the scene size will have an effect on the depth of field blurring. So if you're in a situation where your scene is very large or very small, and you're having a hard time either getting a scene that's in focus, or if you're having a hard time, kind of pumping up the depth of field, you want to change the scene scale. So to do that, go to Windows, Render Editings, Render Settings, and under Octane Render Settings, if I go down to, let's see, under Additional, Scale 1 unit equals X meters. So if I set this, for instance, to 0.1, and then I redid my render, what you're going to see is that the scene becomes extremely blurry. So you can see it's really kind of freaking out there because it's such a low number. Likewise, if I set this up to 100, you'll see that the scene is very crisp. You have to be careful though, because changing the scene scale may also affect your lighting settings and other things such as refraction and that kind of thing. So it will work if you need to change the depth of field, or you can't get enough out of it, or it's too blurry or something like that. But just be careful how you use it, because it can affect other elements of the scene. So that kind of covers the basics of setting up depth of field blurring in Octane for Maya.